When I saw Daniel Craig, he had that low slung grit to him, like an original Sean Connery.
He takes it to another level, even beyond what Sean Connery did. The sequence is amazing. The house sinking into
Oh wow,
the water, like such a great sequence. Like
that's Bond level.
3, 2, 1, special noise.
Hello, how are you? And welcome to Josiah is Right About Film, our film podcast where we together talk about film one movie at a time. And today we're going to talk about Casino Royale. So I wanted to look at Bond films, and I wanted a movie that was a good starting point for Bond films. So this is obviously the perfect starting point for Daniel Craig Bond films. So I would like to introduce my guest, Travis Dunn. So how are you doing, Travis? Thank you for joining me.
Well, good evening. How are you doing tonight, Josiah?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Biggest headphones I could find, seriously.
The smallest I could find, so.
Nah, I like the big ones.
Somewhere in this room, it's out of reach right now. I wish I could reach it. My daughter has these headphones. She is 5, and she has ones that are like cat's ears that light up on the cat ear parts. So those are the winner, but I did wear them once on another podcast, but it was a little uncomfortable because they are child-sized, so.
I would have worn them too, to be perfectly honest. I usually show up in a disguise for interviews.
Well, I guess it depends on who's doing interviewing. So if it's the chief and Bond in the chair, you might want to be disguised so you don't end up in that situation. So
no, that would be bad.
So Travis, where are you located in the country? Because I'm on the West Coast and you are in the middle of the country, right?
Yep, I'm actually from Texas.
Oh, cool.
Oddly enough, I never get to work here, but I live here.
Yeah. So awesome. I have family. My wife's family is in the Austin area and some friends over in that part of the country. So before kids, we would do our road trips and always swing through. That would make it one of our stops. So it was a nice resting spot in between before long drive, especially through West Texas. That's just the longest drive ever until you get to something worth looking at. So there's parts of Texas that are beautiful. That's not one of them. So
yeah, it'll take you. I've driven it out to LA several times and out to Georgia where, they film a lot. Mm-hmm. And it took me one time 14 hours just to get out of Texas.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, you got at minimum 10 if you're really pushing it. I think in the winter, once we drove through and we had some snow driving, but it was Texas snow. So it's this slushy, sleety that it nasty slowed us looking down. Yeah, it was. I'm from Pittsburgh originally. And so I'm used to that kind of weather, but I've been living in California for 20 years now. So I'm definitely spoiled with that. So it was that weird in between kind of snow that I'm not even used to dealing with. So let's talk a little bit about the movie here, just kind of some specs on the movie. Released on November 17th, 2006, directed by Martin Campbell, who did a lot of television. I think he's from New Zealand, so I'm assuming the television's there. Not super well versed, but the first movie of note for me that he did was No Escape with Ray Liotta and like sort of sci-fi prison island film.
Oh, really, I remember it well.
But then Mr. Campbell went on to do Mask of Zorro, whatever the sequel was named, I think Mark of Zorro, and then did the Green Lantern film, which kind of slightly derailed his career a little bit. He's done kind of doing TV these days isn't like it was in the 80s and 90s, but he's kind of been more relegated to that and less like the big features. Like he was on a big role in the late 90s through the mid 2000s. Obviously, with this film was a significant part of that. It was written by Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, who I believe are a duo. They've written a lot of Bond stuff and even like Bond parodies like Johnny English. So they're just firmly in the Bond world. And Paul Haggis, who is famous for his exit from Scientology, among other things, but tons of TV in the 80s and 90s. I didn't realize this, that I looked this up, but he created 30-something, which I knew, but he also created Walker, Texas Ranger, which is, isn't that like a documentary where you're from?
Yeah, the Chuck Norris, but not the new one.
Yeah. I haven't seen the new ones though, but I just that surprised me though that like Paul Haggis created Walker, Texas Ranger, because
I would have thought it would have been one Aaron Norris, but
yeah, because I'm I know Paul Haggis from around this era too. He was on a quite a hot streak with Crash, the Best Picture, $1 Million Baby with Clint Eastwood, and Flags of Our Fathers with Clint Eastwood. He was really, really making some, those prestige pictures. And then you look on his resume, it's also Walker, Texas Ranger, which, as a kid, I was born in 1982. So as a kid in the early 90s on a Friday night when I didn't go to my older brother's football games, that's when I would watch Walker, Texas Rangers, because there was nothing else on. And it was him, kicking people in cowboy boots. So that appealed to me as about a 10-year-old. So, but it just seeing that connection to the guy who directed Crash is just a surprise to me. So, and of course, based on the novel by Ian Fleming. And this is I believe one of 2 Bond films that would be considered sort of a remake, because there was the original with Woody Allen of Casino Royale, the comedy version, which is a very, very different movie. And then the other Bond film that would have been remade is the Thunderball, which then was remade with Sean Connery coming back and Never Say Never Again. And that whole weirdness of that that was if Bond and the rights to that, it's a whole weird thing. Go ahead.
But you're actually incorrect on something.
Okay, go ahead.
You quoted the wrong movie.
Which movie?
Casino Royale. The original was not Woody Allen.
Was it Peter?
Nope.
Not Peter Sellers then. Who? Okay.
No. Peter Sellers was in it as well. A lot of funny people were. It was a great comedy. But allow me to educate you. This was
the TV one, the American James Bond, right?
Very good.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So oh man. Yeah. You got me there though. That's good. That is awesome. That is true. That's the first Bond ever, right?
Yeah. That's Barry Nelson as James Bond.
It was not your winnings they were after. Yeah, it wasn't my autograph either.
Or as they called him in the movie or the show, actually Jimmy Bond.
Jimmy Bond. Yeah. I think I saw it at some point on a Bond collection special features type of thing, which I'm sure these days you could find it on YouTube. But if you haven't seen it, watch the first version of James Bond, which is American, which is the surreal thing that, and it's not bad. It was, a TV, half-hour sort of TV show. Wasn't
low budget.
Terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, but to give you an idea what kind of Bond nut I am, this generally makes this very clear kind of quickly. In 1962, Sean Connery did Dr. No. Common knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But in the movie, he went to a place called the Ambassadors Club, which was actually Le Circle. Here's an actual coin that Sean Connery played with on his poker table.
Very cool. Awesome.
From the movie, and that's an actual piece of his clothing from 1962 in Dr. No.
Very cool. I wish I still had it. It's not quite as awesome as that in terms of memorabilia. I had to watch the band broke. So a very good friend of mine who is he actually did an episode of this. He's a production designer, works in films and television. And he did an episode, the first episode of this podcast I did on Masters of the Universe. And I was in his wedding, and his wedding gift to all of us was James Bond themed watches that Swatch had made. And he got me the Dr. No watch. And because I'm a sci-fi guy, so he thought that would be the good fit for me. And unfortunately, the watch band broke eventually. It just was a Swatch watch, so not the highest quality thing, but I still have it somewhere, even though it's not really a wearable watch for me anymore. So.
Yeah, but these two were actually in the room together in 1962. I kind of thought that was pretty neat.
That certainly has my watch beat, but that is so cool. I appreciate that. I know you said that you would have some treats to share in terms of things like that. So Bond, of course, is played in this film for the first time of 5 times, right? 5. He played Bond 5 times. Daniel Craig, Vesper Lynd is Eva Green. The Chief is Mads Mikkelsen. And it's funny, this was right around the time I saw him for the first time in the film After the Wedding, which he's really great in. It's whatever, he's, where's he from originally? But it's not an English language film. And so I had in grad school, one of my teachers would find these, I'm sure it's not obscure there, but to American audiences, it was an obscure film. And it's a really great film, really good performance by him. And it's funny because I watched these right around the same time. So you see him as this diabolical bad guy in Bond, but he's such a great actor. He brings such soulfulness to it. And then you see him in a really human, emotional role. And so check out that movie. I highly recommend it. M, played by Judi Dench, who is like is she like the one carryover from the previous era of Bond, right?
Yes, so, the one that came from Brosnan.
Yeah. And then Felix Leiter is Jeffrey Wright, and that's kind of the main sort of cast of note. That, you know, there's other people that are important as well in the movie, but those are kind of the ones that kind of carry the movie. So as a big Bond fan, tell me before we get into this movie, what was then your introduction to Bond? Like what was your first Bond film that you saw then? And who's your first Bond?
First ones I would have seen had to have been Connery or Moore, one of the two, because when I was born in the mid-'70s.
Okay.
My dad was a huge Bond nut, so I could not tell you which one I saw first, but I can tell you the one I fell in love with.
There you go.
Goldfinger. That did it for me.
Yeah.
I'll still watch it just about anytime I catch it on TV in a rerun.
Awesome. I went to a screening of, I'm in the Producers Guild, and so, you know, you get to go to the different industry screenings, and there was one for Skyfall, and it was hosted by, the producers on this. I'll get back to this, but Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, who basically the Broccoli family, who her dad was the producer that back when, and yeah, exactly. And so they kept producing. So it was them and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name, the director of Skyfall, American Beauty director. I'm blanking on his name right now, but
Pop quiz.
Yeah, it's I'm like Alan Ball's that's the writer of American Beauty. Gosh, why can't I think of his name? I worked on a movie that he directed, Away We Go. Oh my gosh. Do you remember his name? Because I just can't think of it.
Sorry.
Well, I'll admit that I'm resorting to a quick Google search. I can't believe I can't remember his name. Sam Mendes. Okay. Jeez, oh man. Sam Mendes. So Sam Mendes directed Skyfall, and he talked about Bond. And he talked about his preferred Bond was actually Roger Moore. And he said that was the reason he felt that way. He kind of grew to appreciate more different Bond after that, but that was his first Bond. That was the first Bond that he saw. And therefore that was his view of, for a long time, of what Bond was. And for me, it was actually the same thing. It was Roger Moore in The Man with the Golden Gun. And that was the first Bond movie that I saw. And I just loved it. I loved it. I feel like it, you know, that's a whole nother episode, obviously, but it balanced out sort of that era of Bond with the silliness, but yet there's a reality to it. It's not as heavy as, you know, obviously what we'll talk about with Daniel Craig, but it's not as silly as maybe some of the other Roger Moore Bond would kind of become. And so that was it for me. It was Roger Moore in Man with the Golden Gun. And that's not necessarily the first one I saw. It's kind of like you said, I can't quite remember what it was, but I'm sure that was the first time one that I really sat down and paid attention to and watched beginning to end kind of thing. Whereas before that, you know, Bond at the time was on TV every other day. And even then there was enough movies that you could watch parts of one here and there all the time. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about this film, Casino Royale. So I was really intrigued by watching it again. The beginning of the film, even the credits for MGM and TriStar and stuff are in black and white. So the very credits of this movie are in black and white. It's so, everything is dark that it tells you this reboot is going to be much more gritty, especially coming off Pierce Brosnan Bond. So what do you think of the nature of the opening sequences?
I loved what they did. Like you said, the tone they took. Because I had to admit, Pierce Brosnan, he was a little too light for me. And I really wanted him as the James Bond, but I was like, the scripts are just light.
Yeah.
You can't take them. They don't have that grit to them. When I saw Daniel Craig, as soon as he pops on screen, he had that low-slung grit to him like an original Sean Connery. Mm-hmm. And I love the way the two of them had an interesting way of balancing. They were very, very close together, I thought, in performance.
No, I thought so too, especially not now, but probably around this time. I remember I was house sitting my friend Brian, the same guy, was in his wedding, and he was, you know, he's the resident Bond expert among our friends. And so at the time, he had every single Bond on DVD. And so I went back and watched every single one. And this was probably just after this had come out, or within the few years of Casino Royale coming out. So kind of seeing it and starting just chronologically with those, and you see, oh, okay. And you described it perfectly, that like the physically, just the way he would sit and the way he would move. It's always very intentional. And I think he takes it to another level, even beyond what Sean Connery did in terms of the physicality of the role.
Oh yeah. Daniel was much more physical, I think.
Yeah.
But the grittiness, that toughness, that, okay, we're going to go do something big.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be ugly. And, it had that kind of flavor to it. I love Daniel Craig's, his time as Bond, but I really think they should have stopped with Spectre.
Yeah, I would agree, actually, too. So
I saw the new one and went, okay.
Yeah, because the new one felt like it was sort of trying to like remind you of the emotional beats you liked in the previous movies. Like, remember when this part was good in this movie 3 movies ago? Remember when Skyfall was really emotional, and when M here died and all this stuff, and it's all these grabby sort of sequences. But I love, though, that this movie is an exploration of the character, because Daniel Craig plays it similar to the way, like you said, Sean Connery played it. It's very stoic and gritty, and the toughness feels real. There's a sense that he could do the things that he does, and you don't always get that with different Bond actors. Like Roger Moore is super, super charming, and I love him, but you don't feel the same way when you watch him as Bond. Like, he would not fit into this world of Bond, but Sean Connery would fit into this world of Bond.
Or Brosnan, yeah.
Yeah.
They're pretty light.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to the extreme, those are like almost more like action comedies as opposed to action movies with comedy. So, but with this movie, in really all of the Daniel Craig Bond movies, it's an exploration of that character. And I think that was what the brilliant thing was. Like, you have this guy who sort of, in the social sense, is the image of masculinity, and it shows you that, but it also deconstructs that. And it's like all the cliches about, there's one point when he meets Vesper and he makes up a name, and I can't remember what it is, but it's this somewhat inappropriate name that was the Ian Fleming thing with all these female characters that had these ridiculous not even borderline, like completely over the top names. And they made that joke about it within their, how he gives her that name and she's like, "What? You're not serious." But it deconstructs his sort of like that, the idea of Bond as being sexist and what would possibly essentially make him that way too. It's everything we do is based on something that's happened to us or some experience we've had as people. And it's cool to see a movie that's willing to dive into that while still being just a good, engaging action movie.
Well, yeah, like you said, I mean, remember Daniel Craig in the movie, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, I preferred married women.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. I didn't get exactly right.
No, but yeah, that's the sense of, that's the point to what he's saying. And it's just cool that it explores that, and sort of how, instead of that being like the image of like what makes a man, it's the pretense he puts on to hide. And that's how he hides himself. And there's a great line early where M's criticizing him. Like, I think it's the scene where he breaks into her house to like this event. We learn he like steals the computer codes or something, or the computer, like her login or something. And she's like sort of chastising him for his ego and how he puts that, set that aside. And she, like, I think it might be later, and how to be dispassionate. And she's like, "Well, that's not a problem for you." But it's clear that it is. And he's just tries so hard to pretend that it isn't.
Right.
That he's trying to be the image of what he should be as a 007 or a 00. And that is really what's interesting. And, especially coming off the Pierce Brosnan, where it's just like everything's exploding and they're, doing like flips on jet skis and weird things. And the bad guys
surfing through air.
Yeah. And it's just like to the point where you're just like waiting for it to be over. Like, whereas this, you just want to continue. You want to go on the journey with that character. And I think that's the real difference for me. Because I never liked that. And that was like the Bond when I was in high school. So all my friends were really into that version where I'm like, this is the worst. No, watch these old ones. And they're like, no, those are terrible. Those are old movies. So, but that's 90s kids for you. So then once we get past the gritty reboot, we have the great contrast of the bright opening image and the Chris Cornell song. So rest in peace to him. He passed away, I think, a few years ago now. And but it's just, I think it stands out even more so because the Bond intros are always like these interesting title sequences, especially back in the 60s, which were much more impressive. That was basically a special effects, animation exercise.
I kind of think of them as music videos.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Before MTV, I mean, did anybody see anything like that before?
Yeah. And I was thinking too, like those kind of credit sequences, you see those in now, like a lot of comic book movies have really leaned into them for their credit sequences where things are much more interesting. But at the time, credits, especially in movies in the 60s, it was like, here's this slate of a thing and roll to the next one. So it made it engaging, gave you a song that you'd want to go buy the soundtrack for. It works on the marketing level and just in the audience engagement level. And also, the best of those Bond songs set the tone for the film. What I really liked about it was you go from that black and white to the bright colors. And I think the way they transition through it is he walks across the sequence from, the guy he killed, and then it's that whole like barrel of the gun thing as it comes up, and then he turns, and when he shoots, that red starts the red of all the cards and things like that. And then we jump into maybe to kind of hammer home the grittiness. We are in like Uganda, I believe, and that first sort of action parkour sequence that was made parkour big at the time. But I think it's just really cool. So it sets up the action of Bond as like the polar opposite of the previous Bonds. It's a sequence that seemed completely realistic. Maybe a little bit sensational here and there. It's like he's like when they're like plowing through like the drywall, and when he's driving the bulldozer thing. But it's also very believable. So speaking sort of an overall sense, what do you think of the action in this movie?
I liked it, but I did not like the bulldozer scene on the train. I didn't go for that.
Yeah.
I thought that was just a little stupid that the guy is literally laying in shots fast as he can as he's slowly spinning around in the machine, and he didn't seem to be able to hit Bond. I was like, okay, that's a little hard to believe.
And especially there's a theme like before that where there's like random security guys that he like picks off automatically too. But those guys like bam, bam. But whenever it hits against Bond, he shoots like a stormtrooper. I thought the same thing, but at the same time, I like the nature of the sequence in terms of, like I said, setting it apart from the previous era. It's still a little bit of that over the topness, but you would never see Pierce Brosnan, and you wouldn't believe it in that way of physically battling someone like that, and chasing them down and climbing things that way. That was not his Bond. And really, I mean, the only other Bond that like we talked about, it would be Sean Connery is the one other Bond that you could see doing those things, even though his movies were sort of structured differently and set up differently. The action of the day was different.
Right. It was a different era.
Yeah.
As far as filmmaking.
So I'm not sure if you're a gamer at all, but watching this also reminded me, I just played recently, I'm not a huge video game person, but I played the Uncharted games on the PlayStation. And they're basically that opening sequence to Bond with a lot of like Indiana Jones style exploring. So any gamers out there that are listening to this, it's totally Indiana Jones meets Daniel Craig's James Bond in these movies. And it just occurred to me, like I said, I'm not a huge gamer, but I play some every now and again. But if you like just look at clips of the game online, if you haven't played it, it's really, because there's a part too whenever he finally gets cornered and he shoots the guy, and then he turns and he shoots the like gas canister, like the propane can thing. In that game, there are so many situations where there will be like 10 bad guys running at you, and you have to shoot the propane can to like blow it up so that you can escape. Right. So as soon as I saw that, I'm like, this video game, definitely they watched that. And that game came out a few years after this movie, so I don't think it's a coincidence. But then we jump to the Bahamas. So it's kind of cool. So we have all this, basically, I think after that sequence, there's a thing in London where he's basically told to take time off. He's in trouble with M and mad because he killed the guy and it was on the news and all that stuff. So then he's like, takes some time off and he goes to the Bahamas, but he's not obviously taking time off. He's still hunting the bad guys because he's James Bond. But I love that it then transitions to that's more traditional aspect of James Bond. Like the part of what it is a part of the appeal is seeing these exotic locations. Mm-hmm. I remember watching a documentary about probably The Man with a Golden Gun, and they were talking about when they filmed at those, the islands that they use for the
China waters. Scaramango's.
Yeah, Scaramango's like fortress kind of fun house thing. And basically they just said, though, they would look for when they were developing the script, it was like, okay, what's an interesting geographic location that would make it look unique? And that's one of the things that they would build things around and settings throughout the world. And then you have that in there. And then this finally takes us from those gritty, dirty sort of places in the darkness. You have the gritty part of Africa and then like the sort of the dark part of London. And then you go to bright, colorful, the Bahamas. And it kind of sort of jumps back and forth between the bright to the dark throughout like a bit of the rest of the movie. But this is cool because I felt like you get classic Bond, but you see Daniel Craig kind of being a spy, which is cool to see, like in his version of it too.
The only other one that did as much spying as he did, as I thought was, and he's not my favorite by any stretch, was the two-time Bond.
Timothy Dalton?
Timothy Dalton, yes.
Yeah.
Timothy Dalton did a lot of more of the real spy stuff.
Yeah. Like, and it's funny, like you mentioned Timothy Dalton, that he's not the best Bond, but you could at least see him, maybe he's one of the other ones that would at least be believable in the sort of tougher situations.
Yes.
But his Bond movies are so
unlikable.
Yeah.
They're unlikable. He's unlikable.
There's like no charm to them. So
no, because he's not charming. That was part of the problem. Daniel Craig is rough and tough and everything else, but there's still a little bit of charm in there.
Yeah.
Sean Connery, rough, tough. Yeah, but he can still crack a joke and, Yeah, and even Pierce Brosnan, as much as I don't like the movies, you can still sort of enjoy him as Bond because he's just charming. But that's one of the fundamental things of Bond that doesn't get credit enough, I think, because when you don't have it, of course, the dentist, the guy who was, he wasn't the dentist, but was it the one-time Bond? Oh, George Lazenby.
Yeah, and he again just lacks that charm. So
he was pretty. That was his main thing. I can smile. It was like, can you act? No.
The ironic thing was, with my same friend Brian, the New Beverly Theater in LA, it's owned by Quentin Tarantino. It might not have been owned by him at the time, but they always, when I would go there, I think it was before he bought it, but they would do double features of different movies. Like they'd show like Rocky and the Karate Kid because John Avildsen directed both, whatever double feature it might be. And for whatever reason, their Bond double feature was George Lazenby's Bond, which the name escapes me right now, followed by
On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
There you go, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, followed by The Man with the Golden Gun. So you have arguably the worst Bond with at least the best of Roger Moore. So it was a weird double feature. So,
yeah, that's a little uneven.
Yeah. And the first film was I think it maybe was a good thing. The first film was On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So then you kind of had something to look forward to. And at that point, I don't think I had ever seen that film all the way through. I had seen it, but I'd not seen it all the way through. So that was quite an experience to watch through it in the movie for the first time. But
it had an amazing plot. I loved the plot. I loved all the rest of the casting but him.
Yeah. And I love the music in that one too.
Oh.
It has like, it took it this like rock electric sort of style, like with the symphonic Bond score. I thought the music in that movie really, really stands out. Like there, and it's almost sad that there's things like that. Plus the setting when they go up the mountain and stuff. The action sequences, when you look back on them, they're probably not great. But I mean, at the time, the ski sequences and the slouging stuff probably held up a lot better. But it's just,
you know why, right? They had to go do it.
Yeah, there you go.
They didn't have a choice. I mean, they didn't work with miniatures that much. There no CGI didn't exist. I mean, they couldn't pull it out of their ass in the editing booth. They had to literally go do it.
Yeah.
And that's the reason it holds up.
Yeah. But then that's also the reason that the shots when you then see him close up in the old school blue screen stuff then hurts the impact of, it's like the super obviously he's not doing it. Kind of like the cuts to William Shatner in Star Trek when they're fighting and it's a dude that clearly is not William Shatner anymore. So
yeah, the tattoos down the arm kind of gave it away in a couple of the episodes, but
still
on a little screen, you're not going to notice it.
Exactly. Especially when that aired, you might have just a black and white TV or not. So
or a 13-inch.
Even as a kid, I still we had a TV that was our bedroom TV that was still an old black and white TV. Mm-hmm. So and that was in the 80s. Eventually, we did get a better one, and we had a decent TV downstairs. But even still, like you're not going to notice the details like you will now in 4K or HD and things like that.
But is that really better or is that worse?
It depends on what you're watching.
Yeah.
My friend Brian, again, who the production designer, he said the worst thing about HD and 4K is that I have to look at all these things where I can see men wearing makeup. So basically in the Bahamas, a bunch of stuff happens. And
stuff. Okay, yeah. All right. We'll just sum it up and say stuff.
Stuff
happens. I like that. That was a good summary you had going there. Stuff.
I am I'm a writer with a master's degree from USC in screenwriting, and so that's how I sum it up. If you ever read a script and like stuff happens, I just assume the actors will figure it out, right? That's how movies work. Just improvise things.
That's what I love to see in the script. Some stuff happens.
So, right. but basically, Bond is on the tail of Lashif, and which we haven't talked about him as the villain that cries blood, which is just such a cool thing because he's also, it's just his ability as a performer. He's such a sympathetic bad guy, and I feel like especially in the Brosnan villains were very over the top and cartoony. So that he seems like he would be on paper, but it's just because of the performance that he brings to it, that he's a very realized person. Go ahead.
They also flesh him out more. You actually feel a little bit of sympathy for him because he's got Spectre going to kill him if he doesn't pay them what he owes them.
Yeah.
So the only reason he's doing all this, all these crimes, all this good fun stuff is just to pay his debt to a group that will kill him for sure.
And I love that the parallel between him and Bond is they're both, I won't say insecure, but not as secure as they pretend to be because they're both nervous about how well they're going to perform. Like Bond wants to please them. Bond wants to prove he's worthy of being the 00 because at the beginning she's like, maybe I shouldn't have given you that promotion, she says to him. And it's the same with him. It's like he wants to maybe not please them, but obviously give them the money. So his character motivation comes out of that urgency to do that, which is a very real thing and a relatable thing where everyone has someone that they're trying, not necessarily all the time, but at least some point in your life that you're trying to please, be it a boss or a friend or what have you,
or your next wife.
Hopefully my only wife for me, but
you're young, you got lots of time to get 2 or 3 more.
I'll talk to her about that. So
okay,
I'm pleased with the one I got, so that's a good thing, right?
If you're pleased, then stay where you're at.
I'll say this: she could probably do way better, but I could not do any better. So, but we get so the way we get a lot of this, once we get out of that action stuff, we get to what I would call, this is not a heavy criticism, but the boring part of the film. Because you get the Texas Hold'em stuff and you get to the poker table And that's more of a personal thing. I think, what was it in the book? Baccarat or something, a different card game. I know it was something else, but.
Oh, boy. And the saddest thing is I'm sitting here with a coin that was actually used in the game in 1962 they played.
Yeah.
It wasn't Texas Hold'em. You're 100% right.
But I think it was like the idea was Bond's game was some other card. But I'm not. Right. I feel Baccarat's what popped into my head, but I'm not a card expert.
You could be right.
So, but point being was they made it Texas Hold'em because Texas Hold'em was really popular, especially at the time. I mean, it's still out there. You still can watch it on probably ESPN and things like that. But in the early mid 2000s, it was a big deal. My friends would play all the time. I never got into it, and I tried. I don't like card games generally. It's just not my thing. So I could never get into it. So I think for me, that hurt these sequences in the film because I just never engaged in the card game. But I know my friends who played cards loved that aspect of it.
Well, I'm just the opposite of you. I'm more like your friends on this one. I was actually a tournament champion in casinos. So for me, I understood everything they were doing, and I was like, ooh, turn. What's on the turn?
Yeah, like, and I'm the guy. I'm like, as I'm like, what's happening? Oh, okay. Like that would be me in that scenario, like having them explain it to me. But at the same time, it's a great format for that kind of tension over the poker table, over the table, like as they're just, because the game of cards, as you would know, I really can't speak to this, but I understand it as you're sizing up. Was it Bond says you're playing the opponent, not the cards?
That's always what they say.
Yeah. And that's the layperson's understanding of it. And I felt the film, despite the aspects of the card playing might be boring because I don't understand it, the tension was very real through those scenes because of that. Was it accurate then to the card stuff? Because I really have no idea.
To the letter. They hit it perfectly.
I would assume so. It's like you're going to not get that detail wrong. Like I have in my notes that it says replace Baccarat, so I'm not sure if I just thought that or wrote it down.
No, I think you may be right.
Yeah, so because I do a little bit of research. I obviously watched the films, but I think it
is Baccarat.
Okay,
instant recall. I studied Baccarat because it was Bond's game.
Yeah,
it's actually a very boring game of chance.
Okay,
compared to other ones. You're basically guessing that you have the high card.
It's almost like, when you're a kid, you play war.
It kind of is. It's like, do I hit? If I hit, all right, I got a 6. Can I get any better than a 6? It's almost like kind of like blackjack too.
Yeah.
It's not a particularly engaging game.
Yeah. And I guess that's again, like the thing is at the time, especially the audiences largely would have at least some sense for Texas Hold'em. Mm-hmm. Plus, it's all. I mean, it's maybe it's an American cultural thing. We're just familiar with it. There's that idea of
and most people know the terms. Full house, 2 of a kind, 3 of a kind. It's simple stuff that most people go, oh, I never play, but. Yeah, I kind of understand that.
No, exactly. You know what it means, like to fold or go all in. So exactly. Right. Like, I don't know anything about cards, but those terms are so culturally prevalent that I know what they mean, and therefore the tension of the sequence works. Whereas if you applied it to another card game, I might not know. You may as well be playing Monopoly. Well, I'd probably understand Monopoly better. Well said. So one of my favorite cameos at the Texas Hold'em table is Tsai Shin, who is Madame Wu, so there's 2 cool connections here. So of course, her amazing scene in You Only Live Twice, where she tries to kill Bond at the beginning, like they're, on the bed, and she gets up and runs to the door and the guy's like, shoot the bed, which is awesome. But she's also in, I did an episode of a film called A Leading Man, with which I worked with producer Ed Saxon, and Ed, a couple of his former assistants produced. Justin Bell produced the film, who I worked under for Ed Saxon, and Ed produced and won the Oscar for Silence of the Lambs, and way before I ever met him. And Philadelphia produced. He was Jonathan Demme's producing partner, and so whenever Justin worked with Stephen Chung on this film, or Stephen Kung, forgive me, Stephen, on this film. And it was about basically an Asian American actor trying to break it into Hollywood and the sort of dealing with certain racism things. And it came out in 2013. It was really a progressive movie in terms of dealing with race and Asian representation. And it's a very good film. Definitely find it and watch it, or at least check out my episode about it with those guys. But she was the grandma in that movie. So I'm just excited that I have like 2 degrees of separation from now Daniel Craig and James Bond. So because of Justin and Steven, which that was the real mind-blowing thing. And she's she's been in tons and tons and tons of things throughout the year. She was also in Shang-Chi as the grandma in that. So it's kind of like the Justin joke that she's now kind of like her role as the sort of Asian grandma in a lot of things. But hey, work is work. So
exactly. you grow, you get older and older, and it's like, okay, I used to be the boyfriend, now I'm the dad.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's where I got to. They're like, hey, you're a dad now. I was like, oh, come on.
I think it's the one job in my life that I've always been prepared for. Not prepared, but like a fit for, just if that makes sense. So I'm definitely not prepared to be a dad, but the most natural for me of anything I've ever done. So that said, we haven't talked about Vesper at all. So her character, yeah. So what do you think of? Again, this film has very interesting character motivations throughout it for our, sort of our 3 main characters in James Bond, in Le Chiffre, and in Vesper. What do you think of her sort of character arc in this? Where do you think she starts out? What do you think her goal is at the beginning versus how she ends up?
I think her mission in the beginning was working for Spectre. I think that was the main thing, but she started seeing the different sides of how things worked. And she didn't want to betray MI6 and Bond, but she wound up having to take certain liberties to make that everything happen. Mm-hmm. And for her to stay there, and eventually, of course, it blew up in her face.
Yeah, like I think that it's the really interesting thing. You kind of don't see it until it's great watching this movie again after the first time, when you really examine her performance and her character and the subtle things she says and the way she just looks and things, just very subtle performance things she does that are really powerful in retrospect that you probably don't see the first time watching it. That there's a certain point, and I always wonder, like, what's the point where she then tries to make it all somehow work? It's, it's juggling 3 chainsaws and she can't possibly do it. Eventually she's going to drop them, but she's trying to, and she thinks she can. And it's like, what's the point? I always watch, when I watch back, I'm like, is there a point where she's like, this thing with Bond is real? And I'm trying to now protect him too. Is there a certain point where there's a transition in her, or is she motivated the whole time to protect? It was an interesting dynamic, and her performance, you can see the conflict in it.
The double cross was really interesting, the way they did it. I mean, you go all the way through the other Bond films, and the double crosses were pretty obvious what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But this one, it was like, whoa, you're on which team? What?
No, it really landed well. And again, like I said, watching it again, especially having not watched this in a few years, I think I watched this probably before one of the other, like I went back and rewatched Bonds, like maybe before like Spectre came out, I watched all the Daniel Craig Bonds again kind of thing. But this is the first time I watched it since then. So it'd been a few years. So it was really just, that really stood out to me so much more. And again, just credit to her as an actress for what she does.
She was amazing.
So the one sequence that stands out the most, I think, in this movie, possibly, at least it did to my friends at the time, was when they capture them and after Bond finally is able to win the poker game and Le Chiffre needs his money back now. He has to get it back. He has to get those codes, and Bond is strapped to that chair in that torture sequence.
That was in the original book.
Was it?
That was in the original film and book.
Wow.
Yeah. Ow. There's a word.
Yeah. But just so like that's where you get the epitome of Daniel Craig Bond, where it's still kind of funny but really dark, because he's like, I have an itch, and then he hits him and he's like, more to the left.
Yeah, he's mocking him. He's in all this pain. He's still mocking the guy.
Yeah, because he's like, you can kill me, but you're not going to get the codes, and I know that you're going to end up dead because they're gunning for you now, and that no matter what, I'm not going to cave in and give the codes. And then it's super shocking at the time when then boom, he walks in and shoots him in the face.
Right.
It's just because and that's where you see Spectre sort of they're playing long game, where they're set up where they can't lose.
Right.
The whole time.
That's why the Spectre, that fourth movie was so amazing, how they intertwined everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was the perfect end of Daniel Craig's Bond. It was the perfect dot at the end of the book.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it should have been left there.
I agree. I do.
And we should have rebooted and got to the new Bond, whoever that's going to be.
Yeah. I agree. It's like a big miss to try to, get one more.
Yeah, let's try to make him a dramatic and emotional, and let's make this a cry and weepy thing.
Yeah. It's like, and it's like, giving Bond a kid. Come on.
That's not a Bond movie.
It's like it worked. It worked in Avengers Endgame. That was their thing. Just you can't do it. They did it, and it landed perfectly. It was awesome in that movie that he sacrifices for his daughter and all of humanity, but he's fighting to save her. But yeah,
that's not Bond.
No, exactly.
I'm sorry. I've read almost every original novel. I've even sat at Ian Fleming's desk, and I was like, no, this isn't his Bond.
Yeah. So,
Casino Royale, that was his Bond.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer married women. Just goes the other direction.
Yeah, and after the Lashif's death, there was a line from, I think Eva Green says it, about like knowing who to trust, or maybe it's M that says it, but it's in that aftermath.
It's Judy.
Okay, where you're still like, and it's cool too, because watching the film, you sort of think there's some resolution here, maybe what's something, and then but that there's something looming out there that's worse, and that thing that's worse is her betrayal. But it's also cool that first of all, the sequence is amazing. The house sinking into the water, like such a great sequence. Like
that's Bond level right there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it's and again, funny thing is that Uncharted game, that's the kind of thing that would happen. You'd be in like some kind of old temple, and then something would blow up, and it would start to like slowly cave in, and you have to like climb up it as it caves. Mm-hmm. It's really funny. I don't play a lot of video games, but that one I highly recommend. So, and a really good story too for a game. I don't know how the film is, the Tom Holland thing. I have no idea if that's worth watching or not, but the game is worth playing if you're into games at all. It just like the way he finds out about the way, I love the way he plays it when M calls and is like, well, where's the money? And he's like,
on my way.
Yeah. And he's like, I didn't think you noticed, when he thought that it was done. That's when he figures out what had happened. And then he still does everything in his power to save her, even though she had just betrayed him. Everything he fights so hard to save her in like one of the best action sequences in cinema history in that house. It's so engaging and interesting and unique. And the way she's trapped in that elevator, and then the under the water, and every moment of it, it's so memorable.
That comes back to your thing earlier about scenery. The Bond films have always had amazing scenery to take you all over the world. Like that thing in Italy with a house falling down straight into the water. You don't see that every day anywhere else.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's like the only place that could happen. It makes sense. And then But also, again, I think what's really, when film is great, is when you have a great sort of action piece or set piece or what have you that's driven by the emotion of the story. And that's what's happening there, that sequence. It's not just a sequence for the sake of action, which is like what you would argue maybe the Pierce Brosnan movies are all about. Like, what's the action set piece we can just throw in here to,
set up this glib line, and he gets the girl.
And then next thing. Whereas this is built from story and the emotion of the story and the power of caring about someone. Yeah. It's powerful, powerful stuff at the end. And I remember when I saw it at the time, that really shocked me for Bond, because coming off of those Pierce Brosnan Bond movies, it's different to see something that felt so emotionally real. We talk about the grittiness and all that, the stylistic sort of grittiness, but the emotional reality of the film really resonated.
Like the Roger Moores, you could be watching the opening scene or the last scene, and he's still got kind of the same expression.
Yeah. So any final thoughts on the first outing of Bond with Pierce Brosnan? Oh my gosh, with Daniel Craig in Casino Royale.
He brought a real depth. He brought a real seriousness. He brought a real honest, raw feel to him, which was very reminiscent of my favorite, of course, being Connery. So I instantly was drawn to him when I saw him actually doing the job. I'd seen Layer Cake years before, and I was like, I don't know. but Casino to me was a perfect Ian Fleming written book that got updated and turned into a movie. It was really, I think, what the author was going for.
Yeah, that's cool. Because that's one thing I've not read the book. So, and I've read some of his other books, but I've not read Casino Royale. So,
okay, Ian Fleming's other famous book, what was it? And it might even be more famous than the James Bond movies.
What is that then? What am I going to go?
Yeah, you're gonna love this one. Chitty,
bang bang,
bang
bang. That's Ian Fleming. I had no idea.
That's Fleming. I didn't either. I looked at it. I was like, "Bullshit, really?"
Yeah, that blows my mind right there. That's
pretty stinking light.
If I add, I'm going to add a special effect of my head exploding on this when I edit this. That really is crazy. That's the weirdest thing ever.
I know a lot of really silly things about that franchise.
So awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Travis. It was a pleasure to talk Bond. Do you have any place that, like social media or anything that you would like to say for anybody to follow you or anything like that, or anything you would like to sort of plug or any in that kind of thing as we wrap up?
Well, I'd like to plug my feature film that's out right now on Amazon, Edgar Allan Poe's Decapitarium.
Okay.
It was the first starring vehicle for me, and I actually got to write some of it.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah, I got to write the funny stuff because the writers said, no, rewrite your stuff for funny. You do you better.
That's awesome. Very cool. So I'll include a link for that. So check it out. You said we can find it on Amazon?
Right.
Awesome. There will be links for that below. Thank you again to Travis. Thank you for listening. If you're listening, we're on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, all the places you can listen to this podcast. I think I'm listed pretty much everywhere now. Some places take longer than others. Apple took a few more weeks than Spotify is instant. But you can find it in the audio form where you can hear our beautiful voices, or with video on YouTube. And if you're here on YouTube, please, of course, subscribe and hit the like button and share this with your friends that like Bond or don't like Bond. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much again to Travis for joining me. And that's it. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.